Burnout is one of the biggest threats facing nonprofit and church leaders today. That's why on this episode of the Slingshot Group Podcast, we're going to name the warning signs and some ways you can avoid burnout before it derails your life and ministry. So I'm glad you're watching. I'm Tim Foote, CEO of Slingshot Group, where we build remarkable teams through staffing and coaching. And today I'm joined by my friend, Dr. Wes Beavis, clinical psychologist, author, and former pastor who's walked through burnout himself. In his book, Let's Talk About Ministry Burnout, he outlines 6 stages leaders need to understand and offers practical steps to recover and lead with health. So let's dive in. Well, Wes, it is great to have you on the Slingshot Group podcast. And you and I could spend an hour talking about our history together, which goes way, way, way back. And the big clue to people will be similar accents.
Yes.
But there's high stakes in this conversation today, Wes. I've known, I mean, we all know that burnout has been an issue for leaders for such a long time, especially in the church and on nonprofit teams. But recently I saw a few statistics, and I'd love to get your thoughts on these about burnout in a resource. And it said that 42% of pastors have considered quitting full-time ministry in the past year due to excessive workload and stress. And 95% of nonprofit leaders worry about staff burnout. Now, I think the percentages are actually higher. What would you say about those percentages?
I would say that what we need to take account of is that burnout is definitely a factor. And as when I was thinking about the title of my book, Let's Talk About Ministry Burnout.
Let's talk.
Because what my research revealed, Tim, was that burnout was more prevalent than the discussion about it. And I think every pastor in my research has at one time experienced burned out, which has led to them either getting out of the particular church they're in or the organization they're in, or getting out of ministry altogether. Right. And so, my quest because I had a personal experience with burnout, except I had no idea that that's what it was. I had to go back to grad school and get halfway through my grad school education in becoming a doctor of clinical psychology that,
Right.
I realized that burnout in ministry was a big factor. It's just that we don't talk about it as much. And therefore, we go through the experience in a very lonely manner.
Yeah. Give me a little bit of insight about that, Wes. You said you didn't realize until later. How did that work? And what did you realize later that made you realize you were going through burnout?
Well, I was languishing and, experiencing depressive symptoms and, anxiety symptoms. And, I just thought I was being a bad pastor. I just thought I sucked as a leader. And that was why I was experiencing those symptoms. It wasn't until, I started reading the literature, the research, that it came to light that no, this is a condition. And my research revealed that there's a sequence to a beginning and a place where you end up, and that's what I call clinical burnout. And there's various symptoms along the road. And one of those symptoms are my research revealed 6 distinct stages that you go through on the way to clinical burnout. And one of the stages is a loss of emotional stability, as exemplified by you're up and down all over the place. You're battling with those emotions of depression, discouragement, anxious thinking, and also it shows up in anger,
Mm.
and you have a short fuse. Things that you could normally handle, um, and absorb without losing your cool. You begin to get there quicker. You lose your composure as a pastor. I had one pastor come to me at my office and say, I'm here because my wife thinks I have an anger management problem. And
Mm.
then, when I got into what he was going through, I was able to diagnose that no, he didn't have an anger management problem. He was actually in stage 3 of burnout, where you find yourself less able to absorb the irritants, and I think they call it having a shorter fuse.
Right.
And so, when I was going through it, I was just thinking, well, I'm just being a bad Christian.
Mm.
I'm just not walking in the power of the Holy Spirit. When actual fact, clinically, I was burning out, and that was manifesting in my stability, emotional stability, being turned upside down.
It's interesting you talk about tuning into that shorter wick and, not responding well to your spouse or to your kids or to the barista at Starbucks, and
Mm.
tuning in to that telemetry, I guess, to give yourself messages. Hey, something's going on here. The book is great. I highly recommend leaders read it because we need to catch this before it's an issue. Can you give us a teaser on those 6 stages?
Yeah, well, I can actually take you through them
Yeah.
quickly. Stage 1 is common with all people helping professions, like teachers, doctors, social workers, and that's emotional exhaustion.
Mm.
Um, and so that's stage 1. And if you get emotionally exhausted enough, you go into stage 2, which is an increased frequency and duration of negative assessment. And that is, you think negatively more often and you stay in that negative state for a longer period. So that's stage 2. And if you just stay there without getting help, you move on to stage 3, which is what I was speaking to before, a loss of emotional stability, um, a loss of personal discipline, and a loss of resiliency. The capacity to bounce back is impaired. The loss of personal discipline. It's when, for me, I've always tended to medicate myself with food. I may be unique in that. Maybe there's some leaders out there that have experienced that. And in ministry, it's particularly, because food is such a big part of the Christian experience. We celebrate with food. We at funerals and that we come together and we eat. So much, and so much is around that. And I don't drink alcohol. And one of the reasons why I don't drink alcohol is like, I I'm I already have a big enough battle with making sure that I don't get over um, in my intake of sugar and high glycemic carbohydrates when I'm stressed. But that's when, it's like I start gaining weight.
Mm.
Well, I started gaining weight, um, again, I just think, I just lack discipline. I just lack willpower, all those things that you tell yourself. But, really, I was in stage 3 of burnout. My personal disciplines were slipping. And for me, it was in food, that impacted, what clothes I could wear. After a while, you just don't care because you feel bad about yourself. Um, and there are other avenues of discipline slip when leaders find themselves going on the internet, and their normal standards of I keep away from these sites, those boundaries start to become diffused, and they find themselves slipping in their disciplines, taking what I call a mini vacation into the porn world, which is porn is very very effective for giving immediate relief to whatever stress you're going through at that time. But as you and I know, that porn, like alcohol and all those other things, even food, can end up taking you into a really debilitating place. So stage 3 is kind of typified by discipline slip. Stage 4 is isolation, and it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you feel terrible about yourself, you're spending more time being negative, you're emotionally exhausted, you just don't want to be around people.
Mm-hmm.
And which is particularly problematic if you are in a people-oriented,
Right.
a vocation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move on. Stage 5 is diminished work effectiveness, which again, that makes sense. If you're isolating yourself, if you're staying away from people, what does that say about your pastoral competence? So and then that stage 6, which is the most insidious, it's where you it's identity impairment and confusion. And that's particularly insidious for a pastor, ministry leader, because you think, I know God loves me because he's meant to. That's his, he said that he loved, that God is love and he loves me. But I don't think he likes me. At least I don't think he likes me as much as he likes Craig Rochelle, as much as he likes Rick Warren. In fact, there were times where I think God must be really embarrassed to have me on the team. It's like, oh, Beavis. Oh, what am I going to do with you? You just suck at being a sales rep in my team. Look at Craig Rochelle. He's doing amazing. He's representing me well, and look what you're doing. Now that's we would think, well, that's really that's quite twisted theological logic, but that's what burnout does. It makes things which are totally irrational, illogical, and non-theological, and turns them around.
I guess
you start to believe them.
And I guess, Wes, you would say the voice of burnout is so destructive. You got to be careful what you listen to in those stages. I'm sure listeners.
Which is why the isolation thing is just terrible, because you've blocked out. It's like Elijah. He left his servants behind, and went off by himself, and then he found himself under a broom tree wanting to die. So it's the isolation is where the evil one wants us to be, because then those voices that care and love us, that can speak into our life, don't get an opportunity to do so.
And they're the voices we should be listening to. Whereas I'm sure there are leaders listening that are doing a mental inventory of, gosh, where am I on these stages? Am I falling into burnout? What would be your advice to listeners that are taking an inventory and are feeling concerned about where they are on those or in those stages?
Well, that's an easy one to answer for me, and this could. I put together this assessment, this quick assessment that's on my website. And if you don't mind, let me just, it's a free thing.
Please.
If you go to drwesbeavis.com, it's just a brief ministry burnout assessment, 6 questions, and it will give you a readout as to where you may be.
Yeah, that's a gift.
And it's very accurate.
That's great.
So the only one caveat there is if you have the symptoms of post-traumatic stress can mimic the symptoms of burnout. So if I remember counseling a youth pastor that had several deaths as part of a youth outing, a tragic car accident. Well, that person was their PTSD from that experience kind of mimicked the symptoms of burnout. But that's the only caveat. So that's a really good thing. Go onto the website, just put in and put in your responses to the 6 questions. It'll give you some sense of where you're at.
Thank you for that resource. Whereas we've all seen the stories, high profile, influential leaders making headlines for moral failures or other issues. And we know that you have actually run into some of those burning buildings, if you like, to help teams clean up after these tragedies. It's rarely labeled as burnout, but don't you think it often starts there?
It's Yes, you're right. That's what I do. I like that sense. I run into burning churches, as they're trying to put the fire out. It starts with emotional exhaustion. And emotional exhaustion is the first stage of burnout, and it is not the enemy. Just like depression is not the enemy. Depression gets a bad rap. It is. It's a warning light that comes on the dashboard of your life that says, "Hey, stop and pay attention." And yet, pastors, and I've been guilty of this. We take out a Bible verse and we tape the Bible verse over that warning light. God's put that check engine light there for a reason, for us to slow down and pay attention to what's going on, what we're dealing with. And we tend to override it in the pursuit of, doing great things for the kingdom.
Right.
And so emotional exhaustion, if you're doing your job as a ministry leader, you should experience emotional exhaustion. You should know what it's like to be absolutely depleted, absolutely exhausted as a result of you taking seriously what God has called you to do. So emotional exhaustion is not the enemy. What's the enemy is ignoring it. Just pushing on, the Galatians 6:9, do not become weary of doing good, for at a proper time, God, you'll reap a harvest if you do not give up. Well, I was like, I don't want to miss out on my harvest, so I'm not giving up. I'm not going to take a break. I'm going to keep the shoulder to the wheel. I'm going to keep pushing as if there's no tomorrow. And so you override the emotion, the signals of emotional exhaustion, and then you find yourself on the burnout train line. And here's the thing. The train is slowest through the first few stages. So you can jump off pretty easily. With emotional exhaustion, you can recover emotionally by doing some prescribed activities or pulling yourself out of certain activities. So the train is going slowest at emotional exhaustion. So you can deal with it much more readily then. But if you're up to stage 4 and 5, that train is going so quick. You don't even know how to deal with it. At that point, you can't trust your own thinking, because your own thinking will keep you moving in the direction of isolation, in the direction of talking ill about your own capabilities.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Wes. And I hope leaders listening are thinking, okay, I need to pay attention to the dashboard, because if you do, and that's a great reminder that emotional exhaustion, depression, they're not the enemies. They're the guideposts, the signposts. They're the blinking light on the dashboard. I can think of teams that we've coached over the years in churches and nonprofits, Wes, where you can see the effect that an exhausted leader is having on a team. And it just triggered this thought when you talked about not realizing you were burnt out. I think there are a lot of leaders out there leading, and there's dysfunctionality happening on teams that's heading towards toxicity because they don't realize they're in one of the stages of burnout. What kind of an impact is this having on the organizations and teams that are surrounding these leaders that are not paying attention to their dashboards?
There's a lot to that question, Tim. In ministry, in leadership of an organization, certain proclivities actually lead to applause and awards. So, as they say, if you've got an addiction to recreational drugs or alcohol, they send you to rehab. If you've got an addiction to ministry results, you get a standing ovation and a pay raise.
Mm.
So, you know, in the clinical world, what gets rewarded, you get more of. And so if really pushing your team, and I'm also cognizant of the fact that there are certain generations that feel that you know that quality of life is everything, and really being pushed to work hard is emblematic of a toxic workplace. So I'm not advocating for not working hard and challenging your team, but I am advocating for the leader to have the humility to do personal evaluation of why am I doing this? And not all, but there are a lot of senior leaders in organizations who are trying to prove something. And we live in a culture that even in the Christian world, we have our own rock stars. And it's the rock stars that get invited to speak at all the conferences and get to do all the fun things. And so there's a reward for having certain, levels of achievement. And, so sometimes if you've got a leader who's there to, they're trying to prove something. They're trying to, they've spent their early years of their life being told that they'll never amount to much. That's a classic one. Or they were, or they were in growing up, they didn't know Christ, then they came to Christ, and they just want everybody to know, the benefits of what it is to follow Christ, but they haven't dealt with the dysfunction that they grew up with. And sometimes that dysfunction can be projected into, the Christian leadership space.
That's an interesting point you make there, Wes. And I go back to what you said a few moments ago that was intriguing to me when you said, don't confuse burnout with PTSD. And burnout can become a catch-all word. How do you know if burnout truly is the issue you're dealing with, or if it's some other issue? What do you look for?
Yeah, good question, because any one of these stages of symptoms we can experience in as a standalone. But when you see the trajectory, when you go, oh yeah, emotional exhaustion, yes, I'm thinking more negatively and I'm staying in that negative place longer, I'm wanting to my disciplines are all over the place. There's a trajectory. And so just plucking out one of these, like diminished work effectiveness, well, me on vacation is diminished work effectiveness, because I'm not doing anything achievement oriented apart from recharging my batteries. So, I'd advise leaders to evaluate their symptoms in light of the various stages that my burnout research reveals. So don't just, you don't want to just say, I don't feel like being around people at the moment, and then self-diagnose that you're burned out. I mean, it could be the fact that, you've just, you need some alone time. Even extroverts need some alone time. So I just counsel against, plucking out one and saying, well, I must be burned out. You've got to see kind of a cluster of symptoms.
Wes, I've noticed in my own leadership that I've changed in the kind of recharge time that I need. I mean, you've known me for many, many years. I'm an absolute extrovert. I'm married an introvert, and it took me a while early on in our marriage to realize that she even needs space from me to recharge, because she's an introvert. But I've realized in this season of life, it's so intense people wise that I've needed downtime to really recharge. Even as an extrovert, I'd I'd love you to talk about some best practices you've found to help us listening manage potential burnout in our own lives. What are some practical tips I know you talk about in the book or rhythms that we could implement?
Yes. Okay, a few things, tons I could say about that. First thing is, I have a YouTube channel called Making Life Better with Dr. Wes. And I've got a bunch of just encouraging, uplifting, educational videos. One of them is called Laziness, the Key to Productivity. And, I'd really encourage, every leader just have a look at that, because sometimes the most productive thing you can do is to do nothing at all. So because those of us who are type A, achievement oriented people, we've got so much of our identity attached to us, getting stuff done, achieving things. And so it seems, it's anxiety producing for us to actually say, right, on this afternoon, I'm going to sit on the front porch with a drink, and I'm just going to do nothing but think. People who are action oriented, achievement oriented find that very anxiety producing. But you've got to train yourself to do that, and to be able to, in your own mind, recalibrate that you're not wasting time. Because that's what gets drilled into us. You waste. What are you doing? I can't see you producing anything. You're wasting time. So I would encourage you to recalibrate just how you think about doing nothing, because sometimes doing nothing is the most important thing that you can do. The other thing is, you've got to write your own prescription. What works for me, Tim, is not going to work for you. I'm an introvert. Actually, a fun statistic that my research revealed in a survey that was done with a sample size of about 3,500 pastors, they determined the results indicated that 62% of pastors are introverts, leaving 38% of pastors extroverts. And people who are introverts have a higher rate and a greater propensity to burnout than extroverts. So, it makes you think, why would pastors who are introverted by nature be drawn to a ministry that actually privileges those who are extroverts when it comes to burnout? And there are reasons for that, which we won't get into. But part of that is just to know how you're wired up and to write your own prescription. For me, I love going on excursions, taking my film gear with me and just doing, producing videos. Like this year, I went to Poland. Now, I do it all on a budget. My wife says, I will never travel with you on your budget, because my whole thing is to, I went to Poland, airfare, accommodation, transportation, food, and everything, from LA to Krakow return. I did it for $979. But I was able to do a week's worth of filming, as well as go to Auschwitz and Birkenau. That's what I love to do. It fills me up. My wife will go, well, if you ever take me on one of those trips, I'll be staying in this hotel over here that has a big bathtub, and that's what
I'm with Ellie. I'd be doing the nice hotel.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got to write your own prescription. Some people like big open spaces, going to Montana, and that is what really energizes them. Other people like to go to New York City. You got to figure out what works for you, and what works for you may not even work for your wife. So you've got to be able to integrate that into your life.
Wes, this is such an important conversation. I could go all day, but I got two more questions to ask you
Sure.
in the time that we have. The first is, how can leaders proactively help their teams manage or avoid burnout before it's too late?
I can give you what my research revealed, and that is for the leader themselves to be humble enough to have a coach
Mm,
or a psychologist or a therapist. Um, See, there are leaders out there that'll go, listen, I'm aware that some of you might hit hard times, speaking to their team. And I want you to know that if you need to go and see a counselor, we'll help you do that. We will even help to pay for it. You can even go and see them on work time. It's not enough.
mm,
Nobody on the team is going to go, oh yeah, okay, I'll take some of that, because it's an admission that you're not doing well, or that you can interpret that as I'm not looking competent. What's really powerful is if the pastor gets up in church during his message while he's preaching and saying, I was talking to my counselor this week,
mm,
and my counselor was really challenging me on this and this, and you have no idea how much permission that conveys to not only the people in your team, but the people in your church
mm.
or your organization, when they go, he's human. Yes, he's a go-getter leader, but he has somebody that he goes and talks to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. We say, Wes, in a lot of our coaching, get therapy and get counseling before you need it. And
Mm.
most of the time when you get there, you realize you needed it. Actually, I think 99.9% of the time, actually, I think 100% of the time you get there and realize you needed it. And if you don't realize, then you're not self-aware enough. But you
Well,
got to
uh,
you got
uh,
to get to it.
oh yeah, sometimes people say, I was driving to see my counselor, and I really couldn't think of anything I was going to needed to bring up. And then they get there, and then within moments, it's just like, oh my goodness, this is the best session
Oh,
ever.
Wes, I could turn this podcast interview into a counseling session for me in an instant. I can think of all kinds of other questions I got to ask you about some of the things that I think about things, because
Yeah.
we've all got to process the way we think and continue to evolve in that thinking to stay healthy. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is we have church leaders, nonprofit leaders, and some marketplace leaders listening. Are you seeing a trend in church leaders leaving the church and going to nonprofits or going into the marketplace? What's your thought on that? And what's your advice to leaders that might be making transitions before they're actually dealing with the issue of burnout?
Yeah. Um, okay. Let me just backtrack to your previous. I just want to put a little extra on that. Um, it's really important to build a relationship with a counselor or a coach or a clinician, doctor. Build that relationship before a fire breaks out in your life, because I can guarantee when a crisis erupts, you'll go, who do I call? And you'll, if you manage to get in contact with them, they'll say, right, yep, we'll put you in. It's a 2-month waiting list. And so I counsel my executive leaders and ministry leaders, build a relationship with a counselor or a coach beforehand, because they will always answer your call.
Hmm.
And it's one of those proactive things. So that's just what I
Thank you.
wanted to say to that. Just don't wait until you're in a crisis before you build a relationship with a coach or a counselor.
Great.
This the second question. Can you?
Yeah, the transition. So, are you seeing church leaders moving to nonprofit organizations or marketplace? And what's your advice? Are you seeing that? What's your advice for them making those transitions if they haven't actually addressed the issue of burnout?
If you're burned out, you are going to have an extraordinarily difficult time of being able to transition anywhere,
Mm.
because people can tell. People can tell when you can put your best foot forward. You can, you interview long enough, and they will tell that that um, that you're experiencing some burnout.
Mm.
I mean, it's very difficult for pastors to transition into the not-for-profit and the marketplace anyway. There's the skill set that you have in ministry. It's not as if that skill set is irrelevant to the marketplace or the nonprofit, but it's just we use different terms to, so we pastor people. What does that mean in the marketplace? I haven't got a clue what it is to pastor people. And so I do counsel, that's the majority of my counseling load is pastors. Once they get in the latter stages of burnout, they are in a real pickle because they just don't have the emotional energy and the resiliency factors to deal with either the being able to convey adequately of your appropriateness for that next assignment, or you don't have the reserves, because high level positions, whether in the marketplace, the nonprofit space, the church, those high level positions are not decided upon within the short time span that you're needing it. Churches take a long time to deliberate over their next leader. People in the marketplace, especially the high level positions, they're not going to open a VP position to somebody, within weeks. Sometimes that takes months. And if you're burned out, you haven't got that time. And a lot of times you don't have the financial resources to tide you over. So my counsel is take burnout seriously. If the symptoms start to appear in your life, get out in front of it, because the longer you stay on that burnout train line, the more difficult it is for you to be able to jump off it, and let alone jump into another sphere of leadership influence.
That's great advice for us to land the conversation today, Wes. We talk to a lot of leaders in transition. They say, how long is it going to take for me to find my next role? And we will often say that it will take as long as God wills it to take for him to do the work in your life, for you to be ready for the next role.
Yeah.
And you would say, hey, don't take the painkiller, take the vitamin. And the vitamin is deal with burnout today and learn how to get on a path to recovery and leadership health. Take the assessment Wes talked about. Wes, give us your website again one more time.
drwesbeavis.com. It's drwesbeavis.com.
And he says R like an American, but Wes, I can tell you are Australian. I can vouch for that.
I'm a passport carrying Aussie.
Oh, yes, you are. Thank you so much for your wisdom today, for your work, and for investing in our listeners with such great advice on this very important topic. Thanks for being with us, Wes.
Tim, I appreciate what you do. You are helping leaders be strong in their leadership place where they are, and you also help leaders transition in a healthy way. Because it's really, if you're burned out and you take that burnout to the next assignment, it's really not fair on the next assignment. So if you're going to transition, do it in a really healthy, do it when you're healthy. And I know that you, Tim, and your team at Slingshot, that's what you're all about, maintaining health as a leader. So good on you for what you're doing.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate you. Thanks, mate. Wes, thank you for that powerful conversation. And as you listen, maybe this is a nudge for you to pause, pay attention to your own dashboard lights, and take some steps towards health. And that might mean making an appointment with a counselor. It might mean building new rhythms of rest, or it might be just admitting, I can't do this alone. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with another leader who maybe really needs to hear this. And until next time, stay curious and reach for the remarkable.